The repair or replacement of the struggle with the world has implications for the reorientation of life as well as for the reconstruction of society. We cannot accept the models of existence that are presented to us by the other major spiritual traditions, the overcoming of the world and the humanization of the world. The overcoming of the world teaches us to search for a serene indifference to suffering and change, to participate in the impersonality of the divine, and to value a detached benevolence from a distance as the highest moral experience to which we can aspire. The humanization of the world teaches us to bear the chains of our worldly responsibilities, to perform our roles, and in those roles, to be mindful of our responsibilities to others. These models fail to satisfy a consciousness that has awakened to the infinity of the self, to its longing for the absolute, to its power to transgress the limits of its own circumstance, and to exercise the faculty of resistance and of transcendence. But once we have rejected these models, once we have repudiated them because they teach us to stay out of trouble, when we have come to think that we should look for trouble, what should we do? Just as we have no institutional program that shows what the next steps of social reconstruction should be, and fall back instead on the rearguard defense of the social democratic settlement of the last century, so too we have no credible image of the form of life that is imbued by this vision of our possibilities. The romantic image of personal life has ceased to be believable. Take, for example, the romantic novel. The protagonist struggles to find a task in the world. The execution of the task is little more than a pretext for the development of the self, and then goes in search of love, in defiance of the restraints of society. But the romantic novel ends with the success of the love experiment and of the search for the transformative task. The marriage itself is unimaginable in the romantic novel because it is the field of routine and repetition. The defect in the romantic imagination is to leave the spirit floating over the world, powerless to penetrate the fine texture of routine and repetition, an escape rather than a transformation. And then, in our post-romantic culture, we have come to doubt the availability of the worthy task or of the real love. What then remains for us in this dialectic between the illusions of romanticism and the disillusionment of our post-romantic culture? What is the residue that could serve as the point of departure to define an image of how to live now that would be faithful to this conception of our humanity? We have no such image, just as we have no such political program. To develop such a program and such an image must therefore be a large part of our work. Here are two beginnings. One beginning can be formulated in the language, in the ancient language, of a doctrine of the virtues. The virtues are habitual dispositions to act in a certain direction. In this view of the world, there are three sets of virtues, built in a hierarchy that leads us upward. First, there are the pagan virtues, the virtues of connection, respect, forbearance, and fairness. The work of these virtues is to drive us out of our self-centeredness and our self-absorption, to teach us that we are not the center, and that no one can rescue himself. These virtues of connection are assisted by the enabling virtue, courage. The first virtue, especially the first virtue of the citizen, of the statesman, and of the thinker, without which all other virtues are rendered sterile. But these virtues of connection, assisted by the enabling virtue of courage, are only the first basis for the construction of a life that is informed and inspired by the discovery of our longing for the absolute and of our vocation to transcend. We then require the cultivation of a second set of virtues. These are the virtues of purification, of what the early Christian theologians called kenosis, the emptying out of the self. Simplicity, enthusiasm, and attentiveness. The role of these virtues is to enable us to disentangle ourselves from the peripheral and to focus our energy on what is central to human life. And only through this disentanglement, this work of purification, can we hope to rise up to a greater life and to increase our share in the attributes that we ascribe to divinity. Then come the virtues of divinization. the highest virtues, the virtues by which we become not God, but more godlike. Openness to the other person and openness to the new, intimately related to each other. The virtues of divinization make us capable of a hopeful and patient availability to the lessons of experience. Now here is another discourse in which to begin the task of defining a view of how to live that can succeed this dialectic between romantic illusion and post-romantic disillusionment. This other discourse begins with an interpretation of the characteristic formative incidents in a human life. And here are two such incidents. Let me call them mutilation and mummification. At first, as we pass from adolescence to adulthood, we confront the need to settle on a particular course of life. To be someone in particular, we must assume a station in society and cease to be the many other people who we might become. We must, as it were, cut off part of ourselves. We must inflict upon ourselves a willed mutilation to engage the world as it is, to be fully present in it. And yet, somehow, we must respond to the experience of this mutilation by remembering the movement of the ghostly limbs, the parts of ourselves that we cut off. Through our imaginative engagement with the others, with the other forms of our life, and thus our sharing in the collective self-construction of humanity. Then comes a second formative incident in the course of a human life, our mummification. As we grow older, a carapace of compromise and routine, a mummy, begins to form around each of us. And slowly we die, many small deaths, squandering the supreme good, the good of life lived in the present right now. We cannot dissolve the mummy simply by willing it to be dissolved. The work of the will is to project ourselves into circumstances that deprive us of our defenses, that take away our protections, and that make it possible then to break the mummy apart from within and reaffirm the possession of life. To cast down our shields and to live life as a search so that we can die only once